The wind howled across the barren landscape, a desolate stretch of shattered earth and burning ruins. In the distance, the silhouette of a fallen ship loomed, once a symbol of humanity's advanced technology, now reduced to smoldering wreckage. Captain Derek Flint stood motionless at the edge of the wreck, his gaze locked on the twisted metal and scorched hull. He could almost feel the heat radiating from the debris, a bitter reminder of the battle that had raged hours before. Flint's face was weathered, his once groomed features now hardened by years of war. His short-cropped hair, streaked with gray, betrayed his age, but his piercing blue eyes still held the sharpness of a man who had seen too much. His hands, calloused and steady, gripped the assault rifle at his side as if it were an extension of his own body. He breathed deeply, smelling the acrid scent of burnt fuel and alien pheromones that clung to the air. The Raptors had left their mark once again. Behind him, the sound of footsteps echoed. Sergeant Mara Wells approached, her boots kicking up dust with each step. Her brown hair was tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and her uniform, once pristine, was now covered in the grime of battle. She halted beside Flint, surveying the wreckage. "Another one down," Mara said, her voice a low rasp. She wasn't one for idle chatter, but the weight of their situation made it almost necessary. "How many more do you think we've got, sir?" Flint's eyes narrowed. He didn't answer immediately, his mind still processing the destruction before them. The Raptors, the ancient, cold-blooded species that had been humanity's greatest threat, had returned with a vengeance. They had once ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, but humanity had driven them into extinction, or so they had thought. "Too many," Flint finally muttered, his voice tight. "We don't have time to waste on mourning. We need to find Rax." Mara didn't argue. The name alone struck a chord deep within her. Rax was the Raptor leader, the one who had orchestrated their resurgence. His ruthless ambition had been the catalyst for humanity's most recent nightmare. But what made Rax truly dangerous wasn't just his intelligence or cunning, it was his ability to manipulate the very fabric of their world, weaving fear and chaos wherever he went. "We'll find him," Mara said, her tone firm, though the doubt in her eyes was hard to conceal. "And when we do, we end it." Flint turned to face her, his jaw clenched. "We end it now, Mara. No more waiting. No more running. We take the fight to them." As he spoke, his mind flashed back to the day the Raptors first attacked. The city had been alive with the hum of progress, humanity's greatest achievement, peace after decades of war. But that peace shattered in an instant when the Raptors descended like a storm, their ships blotting out the sun. Flint had lost everything that day, his family, his home, his sense of purpose. Since then, the only thing that kept him going was the desire for revenge. Mara could see it in his eyes, the fire that had burned in Flint for years. It was the same fire that had fueled countless battles and led them to this moment. But she could also see the cracks in his resolve. The war had changed them both. A sudden crackling sound came from Flint's comm device, breaking the tension between them. He grabbed it, pressing it to his ear. "Flint here. What's the status?" A voice crackled back, barely audible over the static. "Sir, we've got movement, a convoy. Raptors, heading your way." Flint's expression hardened. "How long until they arrive?" 20 minutes. Maybe less." "Damn it." Flint's mind raced. 20 minutes wasn't enough to prepare, but it would have to do. He snapped his comm off and turned to Mara. "We've got a choice, either we fight them here, or we retreat and regroup." Mara's eyes flickered with indecision, but she knew which option Flint would pick. "We fight," she said, her voice resolute. "We'll need to set up a perimeter," Flint said, already moving toward the wreckage. "And make sure we have a clear escape route. If we can't hold them off." "We won't fail, Captain," Mara interrupted, her tone unwavering. Flint paused, meeting her gaze. For a moment, he saw the same fire in her eyes that had once burned in his own. The war had changed them, yes, but it hadn't broken them. Not yet. "Let's make it count," he said, his voice low but determined. They moved quickly, barking orders to the scattered members of their squad, all of whom were now preparing for what could be their last stand. The base they had constructed was fragile, hastily built, but it would have to do. Flint could only hope that the raptors weren't as prepared as they seemed. As the minutes ticked by, the rumbling of distant engines grew louder, the sound of death marching toward them. Flint could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had been in battles before, many of them, but this one felt different. This wasn't just another fight, this was the final showdown. The raptors had underestimated humanity once, and they would do so again. Flint turned to Mara one last time before the battle began. "We end it here," he said, his voice steady. Mara nodded, and together, they prepared for the storm that was about to descend. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the craggy landscape. Flint stood atop a mound of rubble, watching as the horizon burned with the fading light. The air felt thick, charged, as though it was holding its breath. Mara's squad had finished setting up the perimeter, and the tension in the air was palpable. Flint's mind raced, calculating their odds. The raptors were a force to be reckoned with, and this base, this temporary stronghold, was their last line of defense. They had no time for second guesses or mistakes. He pulled his jacket tighter, the cool wind biting at his skin. "Mara," he called, his voice carrying over the low hum of the encampment. "We've got 15 minutes at best before they hit. Are we ready?" Mara's figure emerged from behind a stack of crates, her face set in determination. She didn't answer immediately, taking a long moment to scan the area, as though assessing every possible angle of attack. Finally, she nodded. "We're as ready as we'll ever be. The squad's prepped, but I can't promise we'll hold them off for long." Flint's gaze shifted to the distance, where a dust cloud began to form. The raptors' convoy was approaching. Their vehicles were massive, crushing through the earth with an almost mechanical precision. The machines that powered the raptors' war machines were unlike anything Flint had ever seen. "You think this is all they've got?" Mara asked, her voice low as she joined him, scanning the horizon. Flint didn't respond immediately. The raptors had shown themselves to be ruthless, calculated. The convoy might have been a distraction, an initial push to test their defenses. Or perhaps it was their full force, arriving to wipe them out once and for all. "We'll find out soon enough," he muttered, his fingers twitching as he checked the settings on his weapon. He had learned long ago to never underestimate the raptors. They were capable of anything. But so were humans. Mara gave him a sideways glance. "You really think we can stop them? Rax isn't just a leader. He's a strategist. He'll know our every move before we make it." Flint's jaw tightened. "That's exactly why we'll stay one step ahead." A sudden roar from the direction of the convoy snapped them both to attention. Flint's eyes widened. The raptors weren't just attacking, they were sending a message. In the distance, the shadows of the massive war machines were now visible. A brutal line of hulking transports, their armored exteriors gleaming ominously in the dying light. "Brace yourself," Mara whispered, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "This is it." Flint gripped the barrel of his rifle, steadying his breath. The first blast hit them with brutal force. The shockwave knocked Flint off balance, sending him tumbling to the ground. The ground beneath them quaked as a second blast followed, dust and debris filling the air. "Position!" Flint barked, scrambling to his feet. His voice was sharp, cutting through the chaos. "We've got incoming. Spread out." Mara was already moving, rallying the squad into action. Flint could see her calculating every move, every possible outcome. She had been his right hand for years, and her skill in battle was unparalleled. But he could tell even she was nervous, more so than usual. Flint's grip tightened on his weapon as the enemy's war machines rumbled ever closer. The raptors had not made a move this aggressive in years. Something was different. They were adapting, learning, pushing humanity into a corner. The first wave of raptors' soldiers emerged from the fog of dust, their towering forms barely visible against the dimming sky. Flint's breath hitched. Their sheer size was overwhelming, but it wasn't their size that made them dangerous, it was their intellect. They had evolved. No longer were they just primal, bloodthirsty beasts, they were calculating, clever. They thought, planned, and adapted. Flint. Mara's voice cut through the noise, pulling his focus back to the present. They're flanking us on the left. We need to move. Flint nodded, his mind sharp despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He scanned the battlefield, calculating. I see them. Tell the squad to fall back to the ridge. We'll give them a false retreat. Mara's eyes widened. You're not. Do it, Flint interrupted, his voice hard. He was already turning to bark orders to the others. He couldn't afford to hesitate. This was their chance to turn the tide. The squad scrambled to reposition as the Raptors' soldiers began to advance, their heavy steps thudding through the dirt. Flint's mind raced. He needed to keep the Raptors guessing. If they thought they were winning, they would press harder. If they thought they were losing, they would retreat, regroup, and return with more. As the squad moved into position, Flint's thoughts turned to Rax. The leader of the Raptors. The one who had orchestrated this war from the shadows. He knew this battle wasn't just about survival, it was about sending a message. Flint wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. The Raptors had underestimated them once. They wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Flint turned to Mara as she came up alongside him. We can do this. We have to. Mara didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the advancing line of Raptors' soldiers. She didn't need to say anything. Flint knew she was with him, body, mind, and soul. The ground trembled again, the Raptors' machines closing in on their position. Flint took one last deep breath before giving the order. Now. Engage. Flint's heart thundered in his chest, his pulse pounding in rhythm with the constant barrage of fire that rattled the ground beneath him. The Raptors had breached their perimeter, far faster than expected. His squad had done their best to hold the line, but now, the war machines were closing in, and with each passing second, the odds grew slimmer. A blast shattered the air, a deafening roar as the enemy's artillery struck their forward defenses. Dirt and debris flew, masking the battlefield in a fog of smoke. Flint's ears rang, but his instincts took over. His hands moved of their own accord, pulling the trigger and sending a volley of shots toward the advancing Raptors. Fall back. Fall back to the secondary position. Flint shouted, barely making himself heard over the din of the explosions. Mara, her face pale with determination, gave him a sharp nod and barked orders to the squad. The soldiers moved swiftly, retreating toward the ridge where Flint had planned their counteroffensive. But they didn't have much time. The Raptors' soldiers were relentless, pushing forward with an unyielding march. Flint, we've got trouble. Mara called out from behind him. Flint's eyes darted toward her, and his stomach sank. A hulking figure, a massive war machine, thrumming with energy, was advancing rapidly toward their position. It was more than just a tank. This was one of Rax's elite machines, an apex of brutality and design, capable of laying waste to entire battalions in minutes. Focus fire on that tank. Flint barked, but his voice betrayed the tension gnawing at him. It wasn't just the machine that worried him, it was the silence that followed. The Raptors had stopped firing. Flint's gut twisted. When enemies like the Raptors went silent, it was never a good sign. They're regrouping. Rax is playing chess, not checkers, Mara said, stepping up beside him, her gaze fixed on the machine that now towered over the landscape. Her words weren't a warning, she was trying to predict what would come next. But Flint wasn't interested in speculation. They needed action. I know. We need to hit them before they get too comfortable. Before he could continue, the earth trembled beneath their feet, a low rumble, followed by a deafening roar as the Raptors unleashed their next assault. From the smoke emerged a figure, smaller than the war machine, but no less lethal. Rax himself stood at the front of his forces, his eyes cold, scanning the horizon. Rax had always been an enigma, impossible to predict, yet always one step ahead. His soldiers feared him, respected him. And Flint? Flint had learned the hard way that fear alone didn't win battles. Strategy, resilience, and adaptability did. "That's him," Mara whispered, almost reverently. "Rax is here." Flint's gaze locked on the figure. "He's not getting past me." Without waiting for her response, Flint motioned to the squad to begin the offensive. He couldn't waste time with Rax now, not when the Raptors were so close. His strategy was to hit them hard and fast, throw them off balance. They had the element of surprise, but it wouldn't last long. The first shots rang out, tearing through the smoky veil and hitting the enemy machines with deafening impacts. For a moment, it seemed like the plan might work. But then, the Raptors retaliated, faster, more coordinated than ever before. "We need cover," Flint shouted, diving behind a nearby structure as a hail of bullets pelted the ground around them. The squad was quickly overwhelmed. Flint's breath came in short gasps. This was a mistake. The Raptors were adapting, reading their every move. The war machines had almost no blind spots. Flint's mind raced as he scanned the battlefield. They needed a change in tactics, but they didn't have time to think. Mara was already moving again, taking the lead with a few of the more agile soldiers, flanking the Raptors' left side. "Cover us," she called, her voice steady despite the chaos. Flint hesitated for a second, watching her retreating form as the team moved with precision. He knew Mara's tactics well, always one step ahead of the game. But now was not the time for individual heroics. He slapped a fresh clip into his rifle and moved forward, his instincts kicking into overdrive. The Raptors' elite machines loomed, but Flint saw something in their formation. A weak spot. He'd been in enough battles to recognize an opening when it appeared. "Squad, follow me," Flint shouted, pushing ahead despite the risk. The team followed without hesitation, their trust in him unwavering. Flint led them to the Raptors' left flank, and with a well-aimed shot, he took down one of their smaller tanks. The resulting explosion sent ripples through the battlefield, sending several Raptors soldiers flying. Flint gritted his teeth. It wasn't enough. It had to be more than that. "Rax's forces are too strong," Mara's voice crackled over the comms. "We need something bigger." Her voice cut out as an explosion ripped through the comm network. Flint's heart skipped a beat. The squad was in trouble. "Damn it, Mara," he muttered under his breath, his mind racing as he scanned the battlefield. This wasn't just about winning. It was about surviving long enough to outthink Rax. The Raptors had underestimated them once. But this time, Flint would make sure they didn't get a second chance. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Flint's mind snapped into focus. They had one chance left. "Retreat!" Flint shouted. "Back to the ridge. Now!" But as the squad turned to make their retreat, the ground beneath them began to shake again. A massive shadow fell over them. Flint looked up just in time to see a colossal new war machine descending from the sky, its metal wings spreading out like a giant bird of prey. Rax had brought the real fight. And this time, they were outmatched. Flint's chest tightened as the massive war machine descended, its shadow blotting out the sun like the harbinger of doom. The ground shook violently under its weight, and Flint's thoughts were a blur of adrenaline and instinct. He had trained for this, but no amount of preparation could ready anyone for a machine like this. It hovered above them, a behemoth of gleaming metal, its massive thrusters sputtering in the hot, dust-choked air. Its wings spread wide, almost blinding with their razor-edged tips glinting in the light. This was not just a weapon, it was Rax's final message. "Flint, what now?" Mara's voice crackled in his earpiece, sharp with urgency. Flint swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. "We fight. We don't have any other choice." The squad was positioned at the ridge, their escape route now cut off by the monstrous war machine that loomed above. He knew they had little time. Rax had proven his brutality over and over, and now, this weapon, this aerial nightmare, would ensure there would be no escape for them. "We need to take out those thrusters before it takes us out," Flint said, his mind already calculating the steps. Mara nodded from her position, her voice unwavering. Got it. Squad, move in. They had fought worse odds before, but this felt different. The air crackled with tension, thick with the sense of finality. Each step they took felt like a countdown. Flint surveyed the battlefield, his mind working in overdrive. Every battle had a turning point, some spark that ignited the fire of victory. But this was different. This wasn't about winning. It was about survival. Stay sharp. They're not just waiting for us to make the first move. Mara's voice came again, as steady as ever. Flint's gaze flicked toward the aerial war machine. It hadn't attacked yet, but he could feel the weight of its presence, the silent threat it carried. The Raptor's soldiers, previously scattered and disoriented, had now regrouped around the machine like a swarm, their movements deliberate and synchronized. We need to break their formation, Flint muttered, more to himself than anyone else. With a grim nod, Mara led a handful of the squad toward the machine's right flank. The sound of boots crunching against the earth was muffled by the heavy thud of the machine's landing thrusters, and the ground trembled as it settled into place. Flint clenched his jaw. He could see Rax now, standing at the heart of his forces, a figure as cold and calculating as the metal giant that loomed over them. The air seemed to freeze for a moment, the distant echo of an explosion, the rhythmic thumping of their own hearts, the only sounds that filled the oppressive silence. Then, without warning, the war machine fired. The ground beneath Flint's feet exploded, sending dust and debris scattering in all directions. He stumbled, barely managing to keep his balance, his heart thudding in his chest like a drumbeat of death. Flint! Mara shouted, her voice full of fury and fear. We need to move, now! Flint didn't need another order. His body moved instinctively, adrenaline surging through him. His rifle came up, and he fired several quick rounds at the advancing Raptors, providing cover for his squad as they scrambled for position. The machine above them pulsed with energy, and another blast ripped through the air, narrowly missing Flint's head. His stomach churned as the sheer force of the explosion rattled his bones. He knew they didn't have much longer before they were completely surrounded. Flint's mind worked in frantic overdrive, calculating his next move. They needed to disable that machine, fast. If they didn't, they would be annihilated. Flint, we're getting pinned down. Mara's voice was urgent, rising above the chaos of gunfire. We need to hit the thrusters now. He nodded, a sharp determination flashing in his eyes. He knew what had to be done. It would be a long shot, but there was no other option. Flint turned toward the squad, his voice steady despite the mounting chaos. We go for the thrusters. Mara, cover our rear. The rest of you, on me. As they moved, Flint felt a rush of clarity amidst the madness. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for something bigger. This was for humanity. This was for freedom. The squad charged forward, taking cover behind a fallen rock formation, weapons at the ready. Flint's pulse pounded in his ears as he prepared to make the final push. Rax's soldiers were closing in, but he didn't care. They would break. They had to. With a swift motion, Flint signaled to his team, and they sprinted forward. The moment their feet hit the open ground, the machine above them fired again, sending a wave of heat and force through the air. Flint dove behind another cover, his heart racing. Mara was already moving, her team covering her as she made her way toward the machine's right thruster. Flint's eyes locked on her, and for a moment, everything else faded. She was determined, fearless. Now! Flint shouted, his voice raw with intensity. They surged forward, adrenaline fueling every step. Flint's rifle barked in his hands as he laid down fire, his squad following suit. They needed to get close, close enough to hit the thrusters. The machine above was slowing its assault, seemingly giving them a window of opportunity. But as Flint moved forward, he knew one thing with unshakable certainty. This fight was far from over.